Whoa, easy there. You are safe, my dear student. I suspect you were simply having a nightmare. I had intended to let you rest, as we have a busy week ahead. But while I was passing your room, I could not help but overhear your distress. Here, take a sip of some water. Quite the sweat you seem to have worked up there. Must have been quite the terrifying experience. Would you mind if I asked what is it that disturbed your slumber so? Ah, I see. You have a fear of the ocean, do you? That dark, crushing abyss, and the endless variety of nightmares found beneath? I think of all the fears one could have, the ocean is by far one of the more reasonable. Still, if you truly desire to be a seeker of lore, then you cannot allow your fears to compromise the quest for knowledge. Let us put you to the grindstone, then. I will share with you one of the true nightmares I encountered at sea, so that you can understand the horrors that lurk beneath the waves. The basest fear humans suffer from, and the strongest, is fear of the unknown. So to conquer this trial, you must strive to learn all that you can. After all, the truth will set you free. Many years ago, when I had only just begun my journey to discover all the world's secrets, I took up a job on an Imperial great ship called the Ulrich's Fang as a navigator. She was an absolute beauty, the Fang. An impressive display of Empire craftsmanship and human ingenuity. A veritable floating fortress. She carried 3 entire batteries of Imperial great cannon, alongside front and rear firing gun emplacements. With over 400 heavily armed souls on board, I felt the captain could handle anything thrown at us. Albrecht Stormborn was his name. Quite the gifted naval commander, I must admit. Well on his way to being selected for promotion to admiral, at least I think. In any event, I had been hired to assist in the search for a missing set of trade vessels from Erengrad that were long overdue. We set sail down the Reich from Altdorf, and made excellent time past the bustling madness of Marienburg into the waiting embrace of the Middle Sea. Captain Albrecht did not strike me as a particularly superstitious man, but he made the basic effort towards placating Manon, and we were off. The following week passed without incident. Ulrich's Fang leisurely sailing with the coastline of the wasteland as our main guide. According to the notes I had been given by our benefactor, all the ships from Erengrad were last seen by scouts who regularly patrolled the Nordland coasts. We hadn't seen anything suspicious thus far, so I suspected that if there was anything to find, it would be after we crossed into the Sea of Claws. Looking back, I truly wish that I had been wrong. As our vessel approached the border of Nordland, it seemed the Fang had been blessed with clear skies and calm seas, despite entering the treacherous waters belonging to the Sea of Claws. But as the sun started to dip below the horizon, I felt an odd chill on the breeze that made my skin crawl. From the frozen north, where Norska resides, a titanic wall of fog arose out from the sea and rapidly overtook us. I expressed my concern to Captain Albrecht, but he assured me that he had encountered such swift changes in weather before, and that there was little to be concerned of. Even in the worst case scenario, Ulrich's Fang was more than capable of defending herself from any foe, be they man or beast. Young as I was at the time, I had faith in Stormborn's experience, and so did not press the issue further. We sailed on through the fog a bit longer, until suddenly a loud boom rang out, as the Fang slammed into something. I nearly leapt out of my skin, much to the mirth of the crew. One of the sailors up in the crow's nest called out that the hull had struck some debris, before shouting out for the captain to look off the starboard side. I could see a staggering number of assorted items bobbing in the waves all around us. It only took a few seconds for Captain Albrecht to correctly identify from the larger chunks of shattered timber that we had discovered the fate of our quarry. I knew then that we had stumbled into the hunting grounds of some sea monster. One that had likely remained in place, perhaps glutting itself upon the easy prey of the merchant vessels. Already, Stormborn was shouting out orders to his crew, all of them grabbing boarding axes and long pikes, well designed to punish any questing tentacles, while others prepped cannons to ward off any charging beast. That was when I noticed the smell. A horrid stench rising from the murky water beneath us. The sickly sweet odor of rancid flesh, causing my nostrils to burn. I had, of course, encountered my fair share of rotting corpses by that point in life, but this sensation made even the most decayed zombie seem pleasant by comparison. The last warning I managed to take in was a dark silhouette I saw approaching rapidly through the fog, close to the water. One of the sailors, I'm not sure who, screamed out in alarm, and then the Colossus slammed into the Fang. Ulrich's Fang bucked, a series of cracks ringing out as timbers split from the impact, but to my amazement she held strong. Chaos reigned on the deck as men were tossed about like ragdolls, and a few unfortunate souls were cast screaming into the freezing waves below. Captain Albrecht, ever steady on his feet, roared out orders, his crew scrambling to respond, and moments later the starboard side cannons unleashed a volley into the shadowy beast. A great cheer went up, as no small amount of the cannonballs landed direct hits, blasting away entire chunks of our foe. Something about it unnerved me, however, as the entity slipped back beneath the waves. I slowly climbed to my feet, trying to put my finger on why I felt such creeping dread building in my stomach. Stormborn approached me, grinning broadly, and mentioned that I had been quite fortunate. Not many could claim to have been charged by a sea dragon and survived, much less having slain the brute. Apparently, he had been close enough to just make out our assailant. But Ulrich and Manon had been with us, as our serpentine foe fell before being able to utilize its infamous flames. He started to brag about his cloak, crafted from the scales of one such monster, claiming it made him immune to the sea dragon's fiery breath. Should it be determined to continue fighting, Captain Albrecht fully intended to test this theory. Amidst his rambling, I finally realized what so greatly concerned me. There had been no sound. The sea dragon, much like its airborne kin, is no silent, predator. I had encountered several of their kind already, as they are common beasts utilized by the Dark Elves of Nagaroth to drag around their infamous black arcs. Yet this creature had not uttered a single roar, not while charging or upon being shot with cannon fire. And the smell, it had gotten worse, like a miasma of decay, attempting to penetrate every surface with its pungent stench. My blood ran cold as I finally realized what lurked in the depths beneath us. Captain Albrecht paused in his celebratory speech when he finally noticed my pale expression, his own face shifting to one of concern. I looked him in the eye and told the truth. I said to him, "We are all going to die." Shouts of alarm rang out as the monster exploded from beneath the waves just off the stern, towering above the Fang. I could finally make out the horror through the fog, the skeletal abomination revealed in all its dark glory. It had once been a typical sea dragon, but nothing remained of that original creature but bones. However, this was no undead puppet controlled by some necromancer's will. No, this nightmare was animated by something far more bestial and horrific. Writhing within the dragon's corpse was some great pulsing mass, a writhing column of slimy flesh that directed the dragon's movements. I watched in abject terror as the creature lurched forward with open jaws towards Captain Albrecht. Stormborn pulled his scaled cloak around to guard him from the impending inferno. The poor fool. This was no living drake, and instead of raging flames, it belched forth a pestilent gas that washed over the brave captain. Albrecht Stormborn screamed in agony as the rot breath stripped the flesh from his bones and corroded his armor in mere seconds. There was no denying it now. This hellspawn from the depths was a Leechworm. To truly understand this beast, you must first understand one of the great secrets of the ocean. You see, my dear student, whenever something dies at sea, the corpse is drawn towards what the wise know as the galleon's graveyard. At the center of this realm of death lies an immense maelstrom that devours all that is caught within its vortex. However, not all that dies completes the journey into the embrace of the maelstrom. When a sea dragon inevitably breathes its last, some of their colossal skeletons end up sinking into the frigid trenches deep beneath the galleon's graveyard. These are discovered and infested by disgusting creatures called Chasm Leeches. So many of the wriggling parasites will attach themselves to the bones of the deceased drake that they can essentially reanimate it, working together in their thousands to prowl the seas with all the might and speed offered to them by the sea dragon's structure, like some perverse parody of a muscle system. Hence the name of a Leech Wyrm. Back to my story. Held in place by my mix of awe and fear, I watched on in dread silence as the monster twisted and writhed with spastic motion. It was like watching a nightmarish puppet be handled by someone with only the crudest understanding of how to properly control it. Suddenly, it fell forwards, the Leechworm's giant fangs spreading wide, before crunching down upon the ship with tremendous force. Ulrich's fang bucked, and the mast shattered under the creature's weight, rendering our vessel into little more than a floating death trap. Moments later, the worm's skeletal tail emerged from the choppy waters of the port side and slammed against the fang, grinding across the hull and deck to slowly wrap around our ship. It managed to coil around the entirety of the great ship 3 times. Such was the monster's staggering size. At first, I feared that it would simply crush the boat into splinters, a tactic often favored by those sea dragons who still draw breath. But no. The crew of the Ulrich's Fang had a far worse fate in store for them than drowning. I heard them before I saw them, my attention drawn by the sound of something wet and large striking the deck over and over. As I had my back pressed against the railing of the forecastle, I had a front seat to the pandemonium as large black masses fell from the worm's bones onto the deck. The Chasm Leeches had come out to feed. I could not look away. My attention wrapped upon the sailors as they were overwhelmed by the swarming horde of parasites. Each leech a shade blacker than midnight, and easily the size of a man. Their razored mouths stretching wide to wrap around limbs, heads, and entire torsos. None of the crew stood a chance. Some tried to slash at the creatures, only for one to fall from the dripping bones above and knock them sprawling. It was not a quick death. I could hear their muffled shrieks of pain from all those on board, even once their entire bodies had been buried beneath pulsing, slimy flesh. Blood began to pool out all around the deck, and I could hear shouting from down below, as more and more leeches squeezed into every possible crevice to wiggle their way towards the crew desperately fighting below deck. I finally rallied enough sense to move, as I saw a few bloated forms closing on me with impressive speed. At first, I considered leaping over the railing, as I favored my chances of swimming, and would rather risk freezing to death than being milked of my essence by oversized parasites. But down below, the sea churned with red froth, and I could just make out those who had been knocked overboard being swarmed in a feeding frenzy by even more leeches. There were thousands of them. Fortunately, as I told you before, I always prepare some last resort whenever I set out upon an adventure. Although I was loath to do it, I crushed a rare talisman designed for such an occasion, granting me the ability to walk upon the air for a reasonable span of time. I quickly threw myself from the fang just in time, ascending with rapid steps to escape the reach of the Chasm Leeches. From there, I forced myself to watch until the Leechworm finished its meal and crushed Ulrich's Fang within its coils. I took careful notes. The captain and crew may have all suffered a truly horrific fate, but I intended to ensure that their sacrifice had not been in vain. allow me to pass on what wisdom I managed to acquire about the Leechworm in the months that followed. Contrary to what my tale may suggest, these nightmares are not invincible. If the skeletal structure of the sea dragon can be compromised severely, or even obliterated, the Chasm Leech colony will collapse into the sea and attempt to return to the abysmal depths of their natural environment. Keep your vessel on the move, and do not stay in any one place for long, especially if you smell rotting flesh. Should a Leechworm manage to entangle your ship, then your best bet, quite frankly, is a wizard, if you have one. Magic can be quite devastating to those repulsive parasites. But lacking that, then fight to the best of your ability. Fire can be extremely effective at damaging or warding off the creatures, but eventually their hunger will cause them to swarm, despite the pain. If you can, the optimal place to fight is somewhere on the deck, so long as you can form a circle and don't have a coil of the Leechworm above you. That brings an end to my tale on the Leechworm. I trust that you will remember this story, so that you can treat the great ocean with the caution it deserves. I should note that they're exceedingly rare monstrosities, thankfully, especially outside of the galleon's graveyard. However, it always pays to be prepared for anything, my dear student. Now that you're armed with further knowledge about the ocean, I am certain you will find your dreams far more pleasant. Just make sure not to think too much about what those poor sailors must have experienced, having every inch of their bodies covered in small, razored fangs that flensed off their skin and slowly squeezed out every drop of blood as they suffocated in pitch darkness, unable to scream, as salt water and leech mucus filled their every orifice. Sweet dreams, my dear student. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this Monstrous Arcanum episode on the Leechworm. With that, we've arrived at the end of week 1 for this series, and I really hope you're all enjoying it so far. The subject of this video was selected by the folks with YouTuber membership, as they elected on the community page to see a sea monster, so hopefully this was just the kind of creature you all wish to hear about. To take a brief moment to answer a few questions I've seen about the Monstrous Arcanum series so far, this is a narrative type series where the sinister Loremaster is a character. I'll even tell you that he's a creature that's not what he seems, but I'm curious if any of you can guess what he actually is before it's revealed near the end of the story. Another thing is that this series will focus exclusively on creatures and monsters that do not feature in Total War Warhammer, to kind of expose you all to really exotic and strange creatures that you might never have heard of, to kind of just expand all of your horizons. At least for the duration of October's storyline. After Halloween, I am more than happy to open up the list so y'all can get the lore and story written by yours truly about your favorite critters like the Mourngul. Finally, I want to note that these creatures are not all drawn from the actual Forge World book known as the Monstrous Arcanum. That's just the name of the series. I know that's really confusing, I just really like the name, so I decided to use it. It basically just means Book of Monsters. In fact, of the monsters we've covered so far, only the Cursed Etten originates from that publication. The Silkins and Wickerman are actually from expansions to the 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, and the Leech Wyrm is from the Dreadfleet board game. Just thought some of y'all might find that interesting. I think that answers most of the questions I've seen popping up in the comments. So in any event, before I go, I just want to take a moment to thank all of my amazing, stupendous patrons who help make series like this possible. I really appreciate all your support and cannot thank you enough for it. Furthermore, I'd like to give a special shout out to my most generous supporters, being Scion of the Emperor, Eric, Charles Bode, Wendell Short Eyes, Jeffrey Ramers, CJ Ubusta, and Higgins the Seagull. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for another spooky episode. Bye.